Hey, you. Welcome to Latter-day Struggles. This is Valerie, your host. So grateful to be here with all of you. My Friday fellowship, my Latter-day Struggles 2.0 of enthusiasts, those of you on a deepening faith journey. So happy to be here with you today. Hi, Nathan Hamaker.
Hello, Valerie Hamaker.
We are here today deep into a series where we are walking you through the 5 tenets of radical wholeness. And so this whole series is for you out there who want maybe if you're anything like me, and if you're listening to this, you're probably someone who's followed us for at least a little while, and you're recognizing that you're wanting new, novel ways to think about deepening your growth and development. You're somebody who is interested in the spiritual journey. You're somebody who's interested in deepening your understanding of where spirituality and psychology intersect. And to that end, I think this is pretty cool stuff. Let me say it differently. We are laying a groundwork for, we're going to return to this. I've been kind of dying to put this series together for a little while because there are so many things that we can now start talking about once you have listened to this and you understand these 5 tenets of radical wholeness. So we sort of start with this series, but make no mistake, we're going to come back. And I know we're going to come back because as I was putting this very outline together today, I had like 5 more things I wanted to add. And I had to copy or cut and paste and put this whole second part of the outline away because I was like, Valerie, you're going on a rabbit trail. Mm-hmm. So you need to just like stand down, stay with your the main points of this topic of these 5 tenets of radical wholeness, and you can come back later. Okay. So that's what I had to give myself a little lecture. So that's what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be jumping into we're going to deepen one of the tenets. We are on tenet number 3 thus far. So if you think about the tenets that we've talked about so far, there are 5 total: waking up, growing up, showing up, opening up, cleaning up. Okay. Those may or may not mean anything to you. I kind of like them because I think as you learn them, they become a little bit easier to remember, but we are going to continue to remind you what they are until they become like second nature to you. So growing up is about psychological development. It's stages or waves of development. Waking up is a part of radical wholeness or becoming as whole as possible through experiencing states of awakening, peak experience, states of consciousness. And this happens through practices of mindfulness and meditation, or we can have sort of an unexpected deep experience that changes us, sometimes forever, right? Those are the first 2. We are on the third one, which in this little paradigm, we are shorthand calling it showing up. And what that means is that as we evolve and grow up and wake up, we are able to see things more and more clearly. And one sort of shortcut to learning how to see things more and more clearly is by looking at the world and everything in the world through 4 distinctive perspectives.
This really hits home for me when we talk about this. Because when my son wanted to go on his mission and had to go through the temple, I went and had an argument with the stake president about, I want a temple recommend. I want to go with my son to the temple. And the stake president rolls off all these things. He's like, well, you think women should hold the priesthood, and you think LGBTQ people should be allowed to be in the church in relationships, and you're critical of the way that the church handled blacks in the priesthood, and you're critical of the way the church handles its tithing, and you're paying tithing to outside organizations. And yes, and yes. And this is where my personal experience came up against the structure of the church. It's like, I don't know what you want me to say, but I don't believe those things are healthy and from God. And yet I also want to go through the temple with my son. So what do you want from me? Do you want me to lie? Do you want me to say, oh, no, the priesthood should only be for men. Leadership should only be for men. Women need to submit to their husbands. No, the church was fine in the way it treated black people. What did he want me to say? What he wanted me to do was to deny my internal experience. He wanted me to forego my internal integrity for the structural set of questions that had been set up to gatekeep the temple. And that's one that is still a little hard for me.
Yeah.
Because my beautiful son, our beautiful son, is out having a wonderful experience on his mission, and you and I support him 100% in his journey on an LDS mission. And yet the structure was essentially telling us you can only support your child if you deny your own internal experiences and integrity around these sensitive issues.
Something that comes up for me as I'm listening to you, Nathan, is that in defending the faith, defending the structure of the church, um, our well-meaning stake president was incapable of imagining what it must feel like to be two parents not able to go into the temple with their son.
So, when we look at our own experiences and when we look at the experiences of the people that we spend time with in the faith expansion realm, the thing that to me stands out all the time is that people struggle the most because the church as a system simply does not give people the freedom to operate in the other three realms. The church tries to control truth claims, which is the provable. It tries to control culture, and heavens knows it tries to control our internal experiences. So the proposal that you made, and I completely agree with it, is that the church is so dominant on the fourth perspective, maintaining the proper structure, that the other three perspectives are badly injured. And when that happens, that's when people begin to leave. And as you said, and I think it's true from my own experience, the vast majority of people, including myself, who started on a faith journey came because of this category. What were we told was a provable fact, and what have we now come to learn is not even close to the case. And I'll just throw in one other thing before I want to hear from you, but I would 100% throw in the LGBTQ community into this realm, because the church originally taught that it was a sin to even be attracted to the opposite gender, and it was a sin to even feel like you were having gender confusion. And now that we know scientifically that people are born that way and there are structural and hormonal differences within the body that have been scientifically proven that often contribute to people having same gender attractions, or whatever it is that puts them in the LGBTQ spectrum, the church had to back away from that doctrine and say, okay, fine, it's not a sin to be gay, it's not a sin to have lesbian attractions, it's only a sin to act on those. And now the science is showing that when we prevent people from being in healthy relationships, regardless of the gender makeup, that there are huge issues with depression and suicidality and anxiety and so forth. The church is now going to have to confront this new science about what do we do with our LGBTQ brothers and sisters who are having horrible mental health crises because of our doctrines. Right? It's just going to be one scientific discovery after another that the church has to deal with. And it's a big part of why we're on this journey, because we know what the science shows and what real experience has taught us. And the church has dug their heels in so deeply that they are going to have to grapple with this at some point.
And so one of the, I guess, when we learn how to see four perspectives in every moment of our lives, we also learn how to imagine the internal or personal experience of another. It increases our capacity to have compassion for another. So not only am I able to understand myself better, but I am also increasingly able to understand another person is having their own internal experience that's different than my internal experience. And when somebody is deeply entrenched in one of the four perspectives, like in this particular case that Nathan's referencing, in the service of defending the organization or the structure, the true church, our personal pain and suffering, or our son's pain and suffering, the division of a family, wasn't considered. This is the warping that happens when all four perspectives are not seen in any given moment. So we're going to pivot over to the fourth of the 5 tenets of radical wholeness in our next episode. And what it's going to be doing is we're going to actually be breaking down, doing a little bit more detail in the growing up realm itself. So can't wait to be with you there. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. If this podcast has supported your faith journey, we invite you to explore the many ways you can continue your healing and growth with us. On our website, you'll find support and processing groups, marriage and parenting courses, and free resources to support where you are in your faith journey. You can also join Valerie in the live fellowship gatherings throughout the year, where we connect, process the podcast, and build meaningful friendships with others on similar paths. If cost has ever been a barrier, we offer podcast scholarships funded by listener donations. To explore all of these offerings, visit the link in today's show notes or go to latterdaystruggles.com. And if this podcast has been meaningful to you, leaving a 5-star review is one of the most powerful ways to help others find this work. Latter-day Struggles is proud to be part of the Dialogue Podcast Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.